So today's story begins with a girl named Louise, a very beautiful 25-year-old woman. We learn that Louise works at a high position at Columbia University. Later, Louise is shown with a girl named Peter Ramke, and we find out that he is her ex-husband. Even after their divorce, they remain good friends and are quite close. We see that she gets quite bored with her work, so she calls an acquaintance for a chat. Her name is Jessica. Jessica tells her that her husband is always busy with work and doesn't pay attention to her. Because of this, Jessica is thinking about starting something with someone else. She tells Louise that she wishes she could live a single life like her. After this, Louise hangs up the phone and feels quite lonely. The next morning, when Louise goes to the office, she receives a letter with the name Scott written on it. We learn that Louise liked a guy named Scott during her college days, but he died in a car accident. Louise opens the letter and calls Scott. Louise is not really interested in interviewing anyone, but since the person's name is also Scott, she wants to meet him to see what he's like. In the next scene, Louise goes to her mom's house and, there she starts looking at gifts meant for Scott, reminiscing about the old days. It's Monday, and we see Louise at her office, waiting for the guy named Scott to arrive for an interview, but he is a bit late. To pass the time, Louise calls her friend Jessica and starts talking about Scott, the one from college with whom she has old memories. Talking about these things brings back old memories, and after some time, Scott arrives. When Louise sees him, she is quite surprised because he looks just like the Scott from college, and even his way of speaking is exactly like Scott's. After the meeting, when they go outside, Louise asks him to go for a walk and explains that she will teach him all the university rules. Scott agrees to this. After the walk, Louise brings Scott to her home because she hasn't been in a relationship for a long time. And here, Scott also understands Louise's intentions. They drink wine and talk, and during this, Scott tells Louise that he wants to paint her because she is very beautiful. As he says this, he starts touching her, and during this, Louise also starts losing control, which leads to them getting intimate. Louise feels very happy with this young man, and during this, she feels like she's with the old Scott. Now we see Louise feeling happy, and her loneliness is gone. She calls her mom to tell her that her interview went well, she got the job, and now she's coming home. She asks for a promise that you'll meet her tomorrow before going home and then come back again. Scott promises her and then goes to take a shower. After working all day, when Louise is about to head home, she finds out her ex-husband is already there, and he's come to end their relationship. They have a long conversation, after which her ex-husband stays over at her place. But in the morning, when Scott arrives, her husband is also there. Scott starts getting angry at Peter, but Peter tries to work on the engine, and then Louise asks Peter to leave her house. After he leaves, this leads to an argument about who he was and why he was there. Scott thinks she was enjoying with her ex, but Louise explains that nothing happened between them last night. He just stayed over. Scott then asks if she wants to break up with him, and saying this, Scott starts to leave, and then we see that she goes to meet her friend Jessica and tells her the whole love story. Her friend advises her not to make her relationship so complicated. Finally, Lois completely changes herself and goes to meet her ex-husband again and tells him that he needs to understand they can't be together again. In the next scene, Louise gives Scott his joining letter the next morning, which makes Scott happy, and they start getting closer. In the final scene, they share a passionate kiss, and that's where the story ends.